Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week for Friday, July 28th. So glad you could join us. Let's see who we've got in the house right now. We've got Dick Westheimer first in. Hey Dick. Cindy Guentherman is here. She is one of the poets up on deck. D. Coleman, Tom Barlow, Katie Dozier's here. Hey Katie. David Breedenbach. Can't stay long, unfortunately, but it's nice to see you. Nate Jacob is here. We got Janthi Rangan. Good to see you. Play Now. And Jack McKay. That's over on YouTube. Over on Facebook, people are starting to come in. We got Tara Meslick McMahon and Marguerite Doyle. John Atkinson. So far, good to see you all. So as always, the critique, the purpose is to give that workshop experience that is so valuable, to see what strangers think about your poems, how we react, what makes sense, what doesn't, what works, where poems could be improved. We're always trying to be helpful. That's the whole goal with this at all times. And so please leave as many comments as you would in the chat windows, either on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching this. The poets can, of course, look at them later or right now if they're watching live, like Cindy is. And we can also read as many as I can as we go through too. So I think that was a little loud. I turned the volume down a little bit for you. It was maxing out a little bit. But anyway, so Track to Fahey's here too. Good to see you. Yeah, and Mark Milstein and James Langford here as well. Sharon Ferrante. Yeah, good crew we've got going on here. And we have some interesting poems because there's a bunch of form coming up. So I just sort of picked these two kind of at random going down the list, and they had stuff worth sharing, but they end up having a good number of forms, and so we're gonna look at a bunch of different forms today, which will be a little fun. First up is Cindy Putnam Guentherman, a familiar name around these parts, and let's take a peek at Cindy's poem right now, and that's let me move it over here. Oh, how did I do this? Hang on one second, I forgot how I do this. I want this over here. That's what I want. Okay, so let's take a look. Will it still do that? Yep. No. Wrong one. So hang on one second. Oh, because I'm doing that. No, you know what? I could keep doing that. Sorry. There we go. Let's do it this way. So this is the list. And, oh, no, now remember. Yeah, the problem with doing it that way is that I can't see the comments, so I have to move it over here. Sorry, you can't even tell what I'm doing. But I have to arrange the arrays in a certain way so that I can see all the comments and stuff, and it was backwards. Okay. That and that and that. There we go. Okay, so let's take a look at Cindy Putnam Guentherman's the list to start out with. And you can see it's a list, and it's a list of 10 steps. So here we go. The list. He wanted to propose in a memorable way. 2. He took her to a quiet place of whispering ferns and branches. 3. But then the sound of car doors slamming and laughter. 4. Friends brought picnic food and music. 5. He reached in his pocket for the ring. 6. Gone. Chaos. 7. All of them searched all afternoon. 8. Only the setting sun sent them home. 9. She said yes anyway. And 10. A crow added a bit of bling to her nest. So it's a very nice story right there. I like the way it's prayed. I'm not sure if you're supposed to, in a poem like this, actually say the numbers or not. I was, and you felt a little tedious, given that the lines are all short. But I really like the story that's being told here. It's very memorable, very vivid. A little tiny tight story about losing the ring. The gone chaos is so short and says so much. And then she said yes anyway is such a nice line. And then a little twist at the end. The crow added a bit of bling to her nest. So it's a very nice story there. Yeah. And as Alexander Bias says, awesome. I can just feel all this. Margaret Doyle says, I love that. Yeah, lovely, simple, full of images, said John Atkinson. So, so everybody likes this poem, and I do too. It's one of those ones where, I enjoy it and would, think about it, but does it do enough? It seems like it can do more, to be memorable. And I wonder how we could go about, because what really works is the actual story of it, in the simple way it's told, the concise way it's told. Let's see. Yeah, exactly. So this is what Katie Dozier's saying, and that's what I was about to say too. It's I like the story and chirpy epilogue. Cindy's such an awesome poet. I just don't know for sure if the way it is presented in list form adds to the story versus being more traditionally stanza'd. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It felt a little tedious to read this way, but we wanted to that whole sort of like image kind of thing worked well, but it was just having the list. And then what does the list add as a title? It's sort of like the poem doesn't have a frame that suits it. Is my main suggestion would be to somehow find a way. What if we just got rid of the numbers? And I think these are like this. But what if we just separated them? Would the poem feel better if we just kind of like did that, and maybe even use line breaks and did it like a more traditional poem, but used gaps to make it work. So it's going to take a little bit of time for me to do these because it's just the text there. But what if we made these like 2-line stanzas with a big gap between, kind of, and pulled the poem down so it still had that sort of list feel without calling it the list. Like maybe kind of like this. And I think let me decrease the space between stanzas. Hang on. How do I do that? I'll do that better. Okay, I think that looks a little better. Anyway, so and then the Gone Chaos can kind of sit right like that. Maybe this can sit right there too. But does the poem feel better this way without the list part of it? The list. He wanted to propose in a memorable way. He took her to a quiet place of whispering ferns and branches. But then the sound of cars doors slamming. Yeah, maybe car doors. But I think it feels better to me. So Nate Jacobs says, alternately, if it's a list, then write it in more listy language. And so he suggests, 1, propose in a memorable way. 2, take her to a quiet place, And so, and it's told, right now it's told in the past tense, like a very simple storytelling kind of mode. But I think it, I don't know. I think it works better. To me, I don't think the listing adds much unless there's some kind of like metaphor. Like if there was a list in his pocket of things to do, and maybe, that could come up in the poem somewhere. Like he had it all listed out and it all went wrong, kind of, which you can kind of imagine that might be. Or even if at the beginning he wanted to propose a memorable way, so he made a list and it could sort of start that way. David Breedenbrecht says the present tense would help. And yeah, it just doesn't feel like a list, and the list doesn't really add anything unless we sort of rearrange it and give the poem a bit of a different container to tell the story in. And I think, so it's a choice of where to go. And Nate Jacobs says 10, hunt down all crows with known ties to jewel thieves. Yeah. The pacing of the storytelling is really nice, though, and I think, if it was just straight, and then maybe with something, the title that adds to it too, that would help. But I do like the idea of like there actually having been a list and making it a list too. SRH, I'm not sure who that is, but says, I would cut the first stanza, and you're just reading my mind, because if we keep it this way, I think that would become the title, and we get rid of that stanza. So, how do we, Google Docs, but anyway, so make this the title. He wanted to propose in a memorable way. I mean, that works as a title. And then he took her to a quiet place of whispering ferns and branches. Even the wondering, since we have the lack of punctuation, usually I say, and one of the common things I say is to put in all the articles, but there's a nice effect you can have since you're not using punctuation throughout, and there's this like slow progression where you could mix up the syntax a little bit by leaving a few out there. And I think it sounds nice without the of in this section. So listen to this. This would be the new poem. He wanted to propose in a memorable way. He took her to a quiet place, whispering ferns and branches, but then the sound of car doors, slamming and laughter. Friends brought picnic food and music. He reached into his pocket for the ring. Gone. Chaos. So it works like that. SRH says too, I like the mystery of whispering place. Yeah, the whispering ferns and branches. I like that whispering, and I like the quiet place. But then the car comes. I think it's just a nicely told little story, and then the little funny light ending where the crow ended up with a ring. I think that's great. David Breedenbreck says, "How about a bit of bling as the title?" And that's I wouldn't do that because unless you take it out, I think it's too. When the title ends up in the poem, it just detracts from the surprise of that title. Yeah, let me see some other comments. Yeah, so John Atkinson, author, says, if you leave the title as the list, then you might make it a to-do list. Future tense. Yeah. Yeah, even with a list, you could keep the couplets to slow down the pace too. I don't know. So I think at this point I could see it going either way, which is, you never really know. You kind of have to play with things and see how they feel and what you come up. But I would keep it, keep this as an option. And then think about too, like how could you make the list a part of the actual poem though? Like make it a feature, not just sort of a random detail. It has to be part of the story for the list form kind of to work. In this sense, because it's so what it is, and we can look back at the original because I copied two of them. The it's so sort of in your face, the form of the list, that it really stands out in a way that it sort of has to have that kind of like double meta meaning, in order for it to work. And I think there's ways you could do that. So even if you call it the list, say, we'll pretend we're going to keep doing that. Like to propose in a memorable way, make a list. And start the poem that way. And that's like step one. And then we have the actual list. And then even you could even have scraps of paper somehow end up in the crow's nest somehow too. I mean, there's ways you could do it that would make the list sort of relevant and appropriate for the poem. And I think that's just what it's missing. It's sort of just got the wrong container. Okay, let's take a look at the other one. I think, unless anybody has any more comments. So SRH says the setting sun is trite. Oh yeah, that there was a couple things. So some people mentioned the whispering ferns and branches. Yeah, let me get back to Cindy's actual version. Oop. Hang on. Back to Cindy's original version. Sorry, making you dizzy. So setting sun is trite, says SRH, and yeah, there's places that could be spiced up a little bit. So the memorable way, unless that's going to become the title maybe, but that could be spiced up a little bit. The quiet place of whispering ferns, we talked about that. A few people thought that was a little, could be more interesting too. In the sound of car doors slamming, like all these things could be brought out like with metaphor or with a little extra. To describe how the sounds actually feel. Let's see. But I like the simplicity of it. Then we get to the setting sun, which is what SRH is talking about. And I don't know. I mean, the setting sun is the same thing. So they're all examples of things where they could be spiced up and make the poem a little more interesting. But there is a way that it's working on a level where the simplicity is really helping. So I don't know. I mean, those are things to think about as you write and think about poems. I think they could go either way. And Nate Jacob says this would not make a great haiku. I thought for a second a haiku sequence, but anyway, we're gonna look at the city's other poem now, and this is a pantoum. And so if you are familiar with the form, or if you're not familiar with the form, I should say, a pantoum is a repetitive form. It's a Malaysian form that was brought to France at some point. So it was one of those, the French really got into a lot of forms back in the the 1800s. And pantoum was one of the ones they brought back, and it used to rhyme a lot more, I think, in the traditional way, but then it sort of evolved into not really being about the rhyming. But the main thing that now holds with a pantoum, and what a pantoum really is, it's kind of evolved over time, is the second and fourth lines of every stanza repeat. So they're all 4-line stanzas. So the second line becomes the first line of the second stanza. And the fourth line becomes the third line of the second stanza. And then you keep going like that. So the second line here becomes the first line here. The third line here becomes the fourth line here. And it just keeps going as long as you want. There's no limit. And then usually we end the same way we began. Although this doesn't happen here, but it's a common way to do it. And it is similar. So we have the have mercy. So this is how, interesting. So this is how Cindy did it. So a lot of times people will just have the first line be the last line. But Cindy does it, and she takes the first line becomes the second, and the third line becomes the last. So it's interesting. You can play a lot with how you finish it. There's really no rule, although most common is to repeat the first line last, I think. But anyway, there's two things that are kind of interesting about pantoums, but we haven't even read the pantoum yet. So now that we know what the form, we can listen for that echo. There's like a certain echo, and there's a way we can play with words and sounds that help a lot. So anyway, but I am not my poem, a pantoum. Have mercy on these words I write. They are a snapshot of my nowness. 27 letters tumble like dice. The poem blooms apart from me. They are a snapshot of my nowness. Come into the kitchen of my mind. The poem blooms apart from me. Ideas swirl like petals in wind. Come into the kitchen of my mind. Sometimes I tell, sometimes I play. Ideas swirl like petals in wind. I offer them out like a warm handshake. Sometimes I tell, sometimes I play. Have mercy on these words I write. I offer them out like a warm handshake. 26 letters tumble like dice. And so a very nice pantoum too. These are both really good poems from Cindy. Thanks for sharing them. There's not, I think every line, if I read right, I think every line just repeats itself exactly. And there are two, let me pull up, there are a couple poems from Rattle that were pantoums. Maybe I should do, let's see. Okay, we'll do this. This is, a second. Okay, so let's look at this one. This is Alison Townsend. She won the Rattle Poetry Prize for a pantoum maybe 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And here, take a look at this. This is Pantoum from the Window of the Room Where I Write. And so notice, in this one, in the same way as Cindy's, there's every line is just repeated, like completely the same. So it's sunset, the rusted oak turns into a lamp. Oops, that's not one. That ends the poem. She does the ending thing. But then each polished leaf glows amber, lit by sun. Each polished leaf glows amber, lit by sun. So they're complete. They're complete repetitions. But then if you look at this other one I was going to pull up, this is John Ashbery. And this is another way you can play with a pantoum. So notice how, let's see, how he changes it up. So, oops, hang on. The footprints eager to the past, just by using punctuation, though, but he changes the meaning. And this is the one that my, in college they were telling me. When they taught the pantoum, this is the one they were talking about. And it's because of lines like this. So why the court trapped in a silver storm is dying. And then it changes just by the punctuation to why the court trapped in a silver storm is dying. And so that, why the court trapped in a silver storm and why the court are two totally different meanings. And then with the punctuation going to the exclamation point, completely change like the feeling of that sentence and how it's read too. And so that's the kind of thing you can play with. And he does that throughout this poem. Let me see if I can see some other examples. let's see. These days are short and brittle. There is only one night. These days are short, brittle. There's only one night, and that soon got over. So this one extends to the next line. So it's playing with that syntax and changing nothing but the punctuation that makes things read and feel a little differently. So there's this like more distance to the echo. And that's an interesting thing to play with too. And neither of these poems by Cindy or by Allison do that. But let's but what Allison's poem does that's really interesting is she uses the echo to move through time in a really interesting way. And so should we read this? How long is it? It's it's a minute and 40. Let's have Allison read it herself. Why not here?
Pantoum from the window of the room where I write. At sunset, the russet oak turns into a lamp. Each polished leaf glows amber, lit by sun. As a child, I raked leaves with my mother each fall. We burned small pyres, their flames the color of loss. Each polished leaf glows amber, lit by sun. I could not know my mother would die young. We burned small pyres, their flames the color of loss. I stand here watching, older now than she ever was. I could not know my mother would die young. The tree is a galleon, its sails coppered by light. I stand here watching, older now than she ever was. I raked leaves into rooms and houses as a girl. The tree is a galleon, its sails coppered by light. I'll always be a daughter, part of her body's bright map. I raked leaves into rooms and houses as a girl. Death is a lit tree, its amber walls falling in pieces. I'll always be a daughter, part of her body's bright map. As a child, I raked leaves with my mother each fall. Death is a lit tree, amber walls falling in pieces. At sunset, the russet oak turns into a lamp.
Yeah, so you see in this one, there's the lines are the same every time when they repeat, but there's this sense of like two realities going on at the same time, or two times. We're sort of in two places. And so at one point we're a child raking the leaves, and at one time we're the adult raking the leaves. And as the death comes through, sometimes it's the death of the tree leaves, and sometimes it's the death of the mother. And the pyres mean different things depending on the time too. And even the tree is a galleon, you get it sort of in the future or in the present, kind of with the, since the mother's dying young, you get it with the adult at first, and then you get it back. The tree is a galleon, it sails coppered by light, but we're talking about raking leaves into the house as a girl at that point. And so that makes it, like you're imagining all of a sudden that this image of the speaker thinking about her mother's death, looking up at the tree in the coppered light. You go in the second time that comes up, you go back and you see how, as a child, it actually was a galleon. Using a child's imagination, playing in the rooms that she was building with the leaves. And so there's that way that the echo sort of moves us through time and sort of makes a statement about how time is sort of both repetitive and like malleable, and like everything is all existing at once. There's that feel to it that the echo brings up. And that's why this poem works so well. But I think that in the Pantoum, you have to play with something. And I think I like the lines in Cindy's Pantoum, which we'll go back to that right now. But there's not a lot of play like that lets it stick. And so what I think we should add is more play on that level of let's see, more play on that level. So we'll read the poem again and think about how, because there is the opportunity to do it like Alison Townsend's poem, because we're iterating poems a lot. We're making a lot of poems. And so this idea of rolling dice, the letters tumbling out and things like that we do it over and over again, like every day, can sort of be brought more to the surface. And then that'll make it feel sort of a timeless moving through space in the same way. I think that So that's one thing we can do. But we can also, you want to find lines that you can play with just where the punctuation goes to change the meaning, because that's a lot of the fun too. And so, so I think those are things. It's really nice already. But what can we add to play with it? And I was thinking, I can't remember who we were talking to. It was just on the Rattlecast where, what's his name? The guy who won this year's Neil Postman Award for metaphor. I was asking him how he comes up with metaphor, and he goes through poems he's already written and thinks like, how can I add some richness to each line? And he goes line by line like that, really thinking about like where he can adorn a metaphor, and that's the kind of thing I think we want to do here, is find ways we can play with it to keep it surprising. And so let's look it back through and kind of do that and see what we can see. And we'll read it again just in that context, okay? Have mercy on these words I write. They are a snapshot of my nowness. And so even here, have mercy on these words. Like you could do for the later when it comes up, you could, or something like that, you could do. So I write. I write like this, and then it becomes what's actually written. And then so when you get to, well, I guess that was that line repeated later? Yeah. So then when we get to it later, it's just have mercy on these words I write. Whereas up here, it's have mercy on these words I write. They are a snapshot of my nowness. And so it's like it's changing and sort of making that repetition surprising. And so we can see ways that we can do that as we move through the poem, just to keep it interesting and surprising. Because the problem is you're really playing with this line between the expectation and then breaking that. And you have to have a little more breaking of it to make it interesting, unless you're doing that movement thing. So I think those are that's the only two ways I've seen a pantoum work. Is if it has a lot of playfulness with that syntax and language, or if it has that sense of sort of motion and repeating things, and the repetition is really valuable to what we're talking about. I think we've done a good number of pantoums in Rattle. Another one I was going to pull up is this one by Zaina Hashem Beck, if anyone wants to check out another one, Pantoum for Sabua. And here we see the same kind of thing where, so who could dress the toughest in glitter, else who could dress the toughest of all in glitter? So it changes into a question. And there's things like that throughout the entire poem too. The living room, becomes part of the next line. So there's a kind of enjambment stuff going on in some repetitions and others not. And so that's the kind of thing to try to add as we go through the poem. So D. Coleman says, I like the sense of the poet not being the poem. The poem lives independently. Yeah, just like the other poem, I think the sort of point of the poem and the meaning behind it is great. I really like, and I should have mentioned that already, but I like the idea, what it's talking about. I like the concept and the sort of argument it's making. It's interesting. Tara Mesalik McMahon says 26 letters tumble like dice is so strong, great image. What about making it the opening line? Yeah, and you can play too, because this actually offers a nice opportunity to jumble them around a lot. So why not make that the opening line? I think that's a great suggestion. Instead of here, we just switch these. Let's just do that. Why not? Let's go. And then we'll do that thing that I did to make it a more surprising, but we'll do it with this line instead. So we go like this, and then this is now not. So now it's like this. This is the beginning. And I think this is a great suggestion by Tara. 26 letters tumble like dice. They are a snapshot of my nowness. Have mercy on these words I write. The poem blooms apart from me. They are a snapshot of my nowness. And so we go on like that. I think that is an improvement, but I think we can find a lot more ways to sort of spice it up and add variety to it. If we go through the poem a little more. They are a snapshot of my nowness. Come into the kitchen of my mind. Let's see. So here, like places like this, ideas swirl like petals. You could make that a new sentence that reads into the next one by changing this one. That's the kind of thing that I would think about doing, and just play with stuff like that. Just to make the poem more, more interesting, less repetitive. Yeah. Yeah, and as Sharon Friend says, these are not easy to write because they're very intricate. They're like these little puzzle boxes, and once you change something, you have to change the rest. And so I think you get the idea of what I'm saying. I don't want to go through the whole poem and do that because a lot of times you have to change just the way the sentences are. You want to make sentences that work for multiple ways of meaning, and so ideas swirl like petals in wind. So the like sort of sticks you into this sort of simile type sentence structure. But if you do ideas swirl, petals, and wind like that with a colon, then the next time it comes up, you have no like, and then you have a lot more freedom to do something different there. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So the ideas here could be swirling the petals, and then in wind, it's not a great example. It's hard to do this on the fly really quickly live, but in wind, I offer them out like a warm handshake. And so this reads into the next, and so we have the same words, but a different. They're doing different work. Yeah. James Lagerford says to have 26 letters, like to have 26 letters. Yeah, that's a good point. So that's a good suggestion. So if you do this is what I think you're saying, James, to have 26 letters, tumble like dice. And then you could have a comma, and so it's sort of reading and continuing with the next line. And then at the end, I offer them out out like a warm handshake to have 26 letters tumble like dice, and that's an enjambment that reads into the next line. And so that's how you're breaking it up and mixing it and being surprising. Dick Westheimer says you could keep the like above and put an end stop before one of them. So yeah, that's a good suggestion. Like petals in the wind, and then and then that's a beginning clause to another sentence. So it's hard to know. It's hard to show this because it's the kind of thing you sit down and have fun playing with it to see how much sort of surprise and sort of twisting around of syntax you can cram into the form. But that's kind of the fun of the form. And the meaning and the content is like already here. So it's kind of just like one of those times where I'm not a big editor myself of my own poems. But when you get to a situation where you get to like, I have the substance here and I can play with it. It's not quite right. But it's not quite done. But I have all the content and I can just play with it. Like that's really fun. Like there's like no pressure because it's just kind of like, yo, play with it. Let's see what we can do. And I think that's the state that this poem is in right now. The SRH says, I just don't see a relationship between the kitchen, flowers, etc. I assume she was writing in the kitchen. It was kind of setting the stage for me. And maybe that could be made clear with a different title. It's always an option. PMB says that's where ideas are cooked. Yeah. Let's see. Alexander Bias says, to me, the edits with to have make sentences that don't make sense. Don't they? I think, let's see. Yeah, the them confuses it there. We have to play with it more. I mean, it's a lot of playing with. That's what I'm saying. But I'm just trying to give you ideas of how you can switch things around. Andrew Davis says the poet seems to be playing with a psychological lack of focus, an anxiety of options. Form tries to focus all that chaotic energy. In what ways could it change phonetically to represent more of that tension? I think you mentioned enhancement. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. And then somebody asked if it's necessary to have the pantoum as a subtitle. And Cindy replied and said, for people who don't know the form. And I think so. It's nice. It's a nice little nod. You don't have to. But you can. Yeah. So anyway, I was just trying to show some kind of ways you can play with that, because I really like it. I like the concept of it. Maybe we should read it one more time, because I was only thinking about the form, really, in the way, the poem came through to me pretty clearly. And I wasn't really thinking about the subject as a whole. So let me read one more time the original version, and we'll see if there's anything else to add, because I got distracted by how fun the form is to play with, to be honest. But I am not my poem. Have mercy on these words I write. They are a snapshot of my nowness. 26 letters tumble like dice. The poem blooms apart from me. They are a snapshot of my nowness. Come into the kitchen of my mind. The poem blooms apart from me. Ideas swirl like petals in wind. Come into the kitchen of my mind. Sometimes I tell, sometimes I play. Ideas swirl like petals in wind. I offer them out like a warm handshake. Sometimes I tell, sometimes I play. Have mercy on these words I write. I offer them out like a warm handshake. 26 letters tumble like dice. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add about that, because I really just like the content. I like each line. It's just, I think it would be more memorable if there was more playfulness going on with the language. And that's really the only thing I've got. Yeah, as Marguerite Doyle says, they're like links in a chain, really interesting to play with. Yeah, they are. That's why I really like this form. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next poet. But thanks for sharing these, Cindy. Both really interesting poems and fun. They're different, which they stood out as I was flipping through the submissions. Okay, now we have a guzzle, and the next poet is Laura Turnbull, and we talked about a guzzle before. So the point of the guzzle, we'll go over these rules again. I think it was only we have a tribute to guzzles coming up. When next summer? I guess that is. So it's I can't remember. I have to look that up. But we have a tribute to guzzles coming up. I think it's open for submissions now, if I remember right. And it's a great form. To me, it always feels like a combination of the sonnet in the way that it has a cultural significance, like the sonnet does, and linked haiku, because it has a sort of linked verse quality to it, but within sort of rhyming couplets or a rhyming type form too. And so it's sort of a hybrid of the two almost. And the point, really, the main thing, we have couplets, and each one stands alone in its own sort of universe, in the same way two sides of the cut in a haiku are their own universe. And they're related in the same way the two sides of a haiku are related, but much longer. So you get a whole little story, like little snippets of stories that are all about one topic. And then the other thing is the rhyme. So you start out sort of establishing what that rhyme is going to be, which this one does perfectly. Absolute verse and then resolute verse. We have the lute verse rhyming there, and it's a buried rhyme inside one bit. So there's one bit that repeats, and then before that repeating bit is the actual rhyme. So cute, suit, taproot, resolute, absolute. So we have that oot, and then we have verse, oot verse. Okay, and that's the rhyme throughout the poem. And then lastly is usually we sign off by referencing our own name. That's a tradition. Another thing that reminds me of haiku, because there's a lot of playfulness in that regard with haiku too. Basho, it means banana hut, and there's a lot of playfulness involved with that in Basho's work. And so usually have some kind of homage, and there's a word homage there, to Laura Turnbull. And a lot of times we would play with it. So with Turnbull, a bull or a turning or something like that at the end would be a subtle reference to her own name. And it's used, I believe, I've kind of assumed this was the reason why, but I'm not sure. But it's poetry as a game is how this developed. And so in the same way, Renga or Renku goes through and you go around a table in that Kukai drinking game, drinking sake, everybody takes a shot and thinks of a haiku, and you go around the table like that as a party thing. I think the guzzle is kind of a similar thing, where everybody, somebody would contribute one stanza, and then you would add your own, and it would go around the table with everybody adding their own stanzas with this rhyme repeating all around the same concept. And then you have to know sort of when the game is over. Somebody says, "Oh, this is gonna be the last one." They reference the original author or their own name, and that's sort of the end. And so that's why those traditions are there. I don't really see that here, but there's a lot of ways you can do it. A lot of people say, a lot of times you'll see short bursts, Laura, in longhand, give back. So like referencing yourself just like that, like saying your own name. Or you could do the Turnbull. Like for me, it'd be green. So referencing something the color green, you can kind of tell that the poem is over. It's unfortunate when people have more difficult names to play with, but that's part of the form. Anyway, now that we've talked about what a ghazal is, let's read this one and see how it goes. But we know the form is pretty much there perfectly, and the ending with your name is probably the least important. I think the most important aspect is to have these couplets be isolated in time and space. So there's a weird way you walk a line between, even if there's characters in them, could they be the same characters, or should they be different, or could they be different characters? We don't really know. And so that's a lot of fun. It's a lot of leaps of imagination. There's a lot of ma, which is what they call it in the haiku world, that haiku moment where you're sort of knocked off your expectation. So anyway, ghazal. Ars Poetica. And Ars Poetica, of course, if you don't know, is about poetry, so it's a self-referential poem. That's what we know by calling it Ars Poetica. So here we go. So we know exactly what the poem is from the title. Riotously quick and defiantly absolute verse surges through the nib, assembling hefty, resolute verse. The truth pollinates. History happened, but won't serve poetry. Try to write it real, and there it lies, trapped in blind, mute verse. Lopsided slant rhyme rings like bells on a cartoon fairy, high and fleeting, dulcet trickery dispenses cute verse. What is once born of ink may languish in soft metaphor, a holding pen of allegory laid out to suit verse. Short bursts in longhand give back, homage and supplication, digging through the fiber and flesh to divine the taproot verse. And so there you go. So it feels it doesn't have enough the leaping kind of feel that I think, to me, the best ghazals have. Because it's sort of a straightforward, the narrative is moving in one direction continuously through the poem, even though they're distinct syntactically. They're sort of chronological in time. And place and sort of state. And it would be nice to make a little more leaping between the two. I mean, ghazal is a really hard form too. So is a pantoum. These are difficult poems. Let's see. SR8 says maybe start riotous, defiant, absolute verse. Yeah, that's the other thing too. It's a great point. He says riotous, or this is SR8, says riotous, with an exclamation point. And that's the kind of thing, like, you want to shift the voice too if you can. You want to have these like little leaps, where the tone is different or the feel is different somehow in some subtle way, even though it's talking about the same topic and even though it's has that same rhyme at the end. And it's that tension between that, as with everything. Like we talked about the same exact thing with the pantoum. It's it's the same, that tension between expectation and then partially fulfilling that, so you get to keep sort of not being exactly balanced and keep sort of remapping what you expect next time. And so that suggestion by SRH to go riotous, defiant, absolute verse, surges through the nib. I think it's a great suggestion. It ends up being a little short, that line. But the difference between, the tone here with the exclamation points and the more measured and reserved tone later, truth pollinates, history happened, but won't serve poetry, that the difference in that tone is the kind of thing you're moving through. Yeah. Yeah, absolute verse surges to the nib, assembling hefty, resolute verse. Truth pollinates, history happened but won't serve poetry. Try to write it real, and there it lies, trapped in blind, mute verse. And so here on the third line, lopsided slant rhyme rings like bells in a cartoon fairy. So we get that metaphor like bells in a cartoon fairy that sort of moves us away from the feel of what we were talking about before. So I think this is the best transition between two couplets right here. And that's the kind of thing you're going for. To be surprised, there's a connection always between each couplet, but there's also a leap. And we want to have a little bit of a surprise. And I think that it does that there with that use of metaphor, because the cartoon fairy is not anything like, history happening and the truth pollinating and that kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway, lopsided slant rhyme rings like bells on a cartoon fairy, high and fleeting, dulcet trickery dispenses cute verse. Dulcet trickery dispenses cute verse. I'm not sure what that means. It's hard, almost hard to follow the meaning a little bit of many of these couplets. The truth pollinates. I like this couplet. This couplet's very clear. The lopsided slant rhyme rings like bells on a cartoon fairy. Lopsided slant rhyme. High and fleeting, dulcet trickery dispenses cute verse. Like some of the words here just, dispenses, is that really what it's doing? Lopsided slant rhyme rings like bells. And if it's lopsided slant rhyme, I would think of cute verse as like sing-songy, Seussian type rhyme, I wouldn't think of it as lopsided slant rhyme, which is a lot more distant. So, there's things like that are hard to follow. Mark Griner says poetry fairy is a nice half rhyme. Yeah, it is. There's a lot of nice bits to this. But why? Like on an actual logical level, on a literal level, why would slant rhyme even? Is Mark Griner or D. Coleman says I would cut the lopsided. Even slant rhyme. Why would slant rhyme ring like bells in a cartoon fairy? Because the idea that slant rhyme would implies that, because it's modifying, it's a subset of rhyme. The fact that you draw out slant implies that, perfect rhyme doesn't ring like a bell in a cartoon fairy, but why wouldn't it? And so it's hard to, I don't know if you're following the logic of that, but it's hard to understand what that actually is saying and how that would make sense. What is once born of ink may languish in soft metaphor, a holding pen of allegory laid out to suit verse. These are a lot to disentangle. Nancy Chanel says, is it referring to artificial contrived poetry, cartoon fairies, sweet trick to be cute? Yeah, so as SRH says, maybe cut slant and keep lopsided. Lopsided rhyme rings like bells on the cartoon. I think that makes a little more sense. Yeah. But yeah, so it's talking about not being true, like Nancy says. Yeah. Yeah, so good. SRH, you're coming up with good suggestions. Yeah. Yeah, maybe cut the slant. And then here, too, I think you want to keep the lines kind of similar in length, too. So maybe you can add another word here, too, I meant to say. Or another couple words there. Or another little phrase or something. But yeah. And yeah, so just lopsided makes that sentence better. Dulcet trickery dispenses cute verse. But I still don't understand why the sweetness, because cute verse is sweet, so why would it be dispensed by the sweetness? So that's the whole thing. I mean, it's I don't know if it makes sense. But it's fun to play with it. It's an interesting to try to tease it out, but I don't know if I can resolve that in my head. And I think the same with the next line too. What is once born of ink may languish in soft metaphor, a holding pen of allegory laid out to suit verse. Well, that makes a little more sense. So it's I'm not sure really the born of ink, but the holding pen of allegory laid out to suit verse is really nice. Short bursts and longhand give back homage and supplication, digging through fiber and flesh to divine the taproot verse. Mark Griner says like a Pez dispenser dispenses. Oh, yeah, okay. So dulcet trickery dispenses cute verse. Like it handing it out cute. Hands out cute verse. I guess that makes sense. Is dispense a word that means two things that are that far opposite? Am I like, let's see. Yeah. So it means most to give out and, to distribute and to manage without distributing. So, yeah, that is a strange word. I didn't ever really realize that or thought of that. But yeah, it means both. So both, to give and to keep. Anyway, so I guess that works. I think that, it's tangly. Yeah, and so for this poem to stay with the guzzle form and really and make the most of it. I really love the way it's laid out. I love the rhymes, the mute verse. You have all that set up. But the point of the poem, which is sort of, like there's a difference between absolute and resolute verse is I guess what we're teasing out. But if we could make that the title so it's kind of clear what we're going after in the poem, but then you want to hit it from like every angle you can throughout the guzzle, and that's more the way the form, operates. So I don't know. So more of those leaps between stanzas is really what we need, and a little more clarity too, I think. Let's see. Yeah. Dana Dube likes the fourth. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I like that holding pen of allegory laid out to suit the verse. Suit verse. I like that a lot. I think that's my favorite single line in the poem. Alexandria Bice says history happened but won't serve poetry. She likes that. Yeah, and then Alexander Bice again says heavy resolute verse seems redundant of absolute verse, and both feel a bit vaguely abstract to me. Yeah, that's the thing. Everything it's just slightly abstract to the point where I'm having trouble following it. And if we had that, in the title, like the difference between absolute verse and resolute verse, however it was, just make it clear as simply as you can is the title, and we know what we're sort of getting at, and then think of each couplet as like a different way of seeing that, like a different angle on that concept, instead of sort of chronologically laying out sort of the same argument but not being as clear about it. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Alexandra Baez also says, I was confused by pen because I thought she was referring to the writing instrument. Yeah, yeah, for some reason that one, it's the same kind of double meaning as the dispense, but that one didn't throw me off, but because I immediately went to the right one. And it's kind of a pun, too. I think it's intentional. Yeah, so there's a lot of play here, but I would just, do what I said. So it's a kind of poem. Another critique, we've had, this one is like a great structure, and let's sort of make the most of the form again. I guess is the advice on this one. Do we have any other comments? SRH says sweet mark's better than dulcet. Yeah, and that's part of it. There's that, like things are less clear than they, they're little, high sounding. Yeah. And things are more, they could be said clearer, but they're said in a way that's poetic to sacrifice clarity. And I'm not sure a whole lot is gained by that. And that's one of the reasons why it's hard to follow. So, yeah. Yeah, as Mark Grader says, a good start with lots to work with. Keep playing on it. Yeah, I agree. That there's a poem here, but it takes some more drafting. And really, like, think of that. We have a holding pen of allegory. I mean, that's a really nice. People like that line a lot. I like that line a lot. Think of that as its own unit, like its own space, like. So you can actually envision a holding pen. There's allegory. Think of like maybe, pigs or some kind of thing that would be in a pen, and have that be like an image that we do that one couplet around, and then never do that image again, and do something else with each other image. That's the kind of way you would structure it for a ghazal to make it work as strong as possible. Maybe we, let's see. Yeah, I don't know. Should I show another example of one? I think I don't know if we did this one last time. Did we do this one, the Ghazal back home? I think this shows it so well. This is, oops, I got to put it on this screen. But this shows, this is Zaina Hashem Beck's Ghazal back home. And it shows that really well because tonight a little boy couldn't walk on water or row back home. The sea turned its old face away. Again, there was a no back home. So we have this image of the little boy who drowned, right? But then we go to bar. We talk about like a self-wrench, Ars Poetica. Bar is how we measure, or we were taught to measure poetry. Bar is how we stopped trying to measure sorrow back home. And then we go to a boy in heaven. It doesn't have to necessarily be the same boy, but it's a boy in heaven confronting God. So you can imagine it could be the boy from the first couplet. And I should expand this so they look better. It could be the boy from the first couplet or not. But God says, all that is blue is the sea, and it gives life, says God, the boy standing wet at heaven's gate. So it sort of implies, but a lot of kids drown, unfortunately, and so it could be a different kid. Does he want to return, to go back home? Then we go, my friend cooking has made eggplant dish. So we go all of a sudden from this, we go from God in heaven with this wet boy at the heaven's gate to my friend who hates cooking has made that eggplant dish, says nothing was better than yogurt and garlic and tomato back home. So, so we're swiveling around this concept. We have the O back home rhyme, but we're hitting it from all these different angles, these concepts of home and what it means in a finite world and all that stuff. Yeah. So, and that's really the power of it. And, if you look it through, I should emphasize this too. If you look through, some you can go through, I think poetry.com or whatever, or wherever, where you find good poems, poets.org, Poetry Foundation's website. You can find listings of poems that are like modern ghazals and stuff, and people don't follow all the rules, and they don't follow. Some of them just call it a ghazal if it has this rhyme scheme, even if the couplets aren't isolated. But I think that the forms, they work really well and have such sustaining power for a reason, and I think it's worth it in a lot of cases to take as much advantage of the form as possible. And I think in this case we could do a lot more. We could add to the poem a lot by playing with the form in that way. Yeah. Okay, so it's an hour mark, but let's get up to the next poem. And the next poem is a shape-ish poem, sort of concrete. And this is Spiral. Again, this is Laura Turnbull. But yeah, Spiral. She curves and flits fluently, a silver spectre. She flickers. I've been here before. Her flares unbalance you, the static pricks you. Eyes parched, forget to blink. She does a lithe flyby, low and stealthy, trailing your sightline, a star shaped from dazzling ancient explosions. She hovers and pulses. Light as sound, as flavor, on your tongue is hope that she will never disappear, which she does. When she sees you, see her. You think you learned about this in school. You think you know how geometry disperses her into light you will never be able to see. She's been here before. You think that means she'll come back. So very interesting poem, Laura Turnbull. I like this one a lot. Notice how, we talk about line length. And you can see the way it works in this poem, because you read slowly when the lines are short, and then it makes you speed up when the lines are longer. And so it's really doing a good job of pacing, even though through the shape of this poem. So Spiral, she curves and flits fluently, a silver spectre. Yeah, so it's a nice start. Is spectre, is that how you spell spectre? Yeah. All right, a ghost. For some reason I thought it might be or, O-R, a silver spectre. So it's a very nice start to the poem, that very image rich, and it draws it out slowly with these short lines. The title is called Spiral, which sort of refers, like, there's a spiraling feel to this. Even though it's interesting too, because we have that effect that we read and sort of comprehend the poem more slowly when the lines are short, and it speeds up. So it kind of feels like almost because you're speeding up toward the end, going down the drain a little bit, like getting closer and closer in a spiral, which is fascinating, but really fascinating too that it's inverted to the look of the poem too, which sort of looks like a spiral in reverse. So it's sort of like a spiral in both ways, which is really interesting. So I like the shape of it, and I like the way it feels. Anyway, so she curves and flits fluently, a silver specter. She flickers, I've been here before. Her flares unbalance you. The static pricks you. So who is the... I'm a little... I don't never know who the you is. Her flares unbalance you, the static pricks you, eyes parched, forget to blink. She does a lithe flyby, low and stealthy, trailing your sightline, a star shaped from dazzling ancient explosions. A star shaped from dazzling ancient explosions. She hovers and pulses. Light as sound, as flavor on your tongue, as hope that she will never disappear. I love that, the way that we sort of forego syntax and like rush up, and jam those multiple sentences together. I think it works really well, which she does when she sees you see her. You think you learned about this in school. You think you know how geometry disperses her into light you will never be able to see. She's been here before. You think that means she'll come back. I don't know. What do you say about this one? Because it's sort of, it leaves you hanging a little bit with what did we really witness? But I think in a good way. So I'm not really sure where to go with this one because in general, I just kind of like it. Yeah, as Margaret Doyle says, lovely lines, and I like the poet's voice. Dano Doob says she may be talking about a feeling inside her, which is interesting too. Yeah, I like that idea. And also says Spectre's almost unreal. And then Alexander Baez says, I like all the short I sounds in the first half, especially the way static pricks you, catches me. It feels like a rhyme, although it isn't. Yeah. Sydney Putnam Gunther says she loves this one. I like this one too. I'm not sure. I'm trying to think of like a way it can be improved. Does anyone feel off? This feels mesmerizing, Laura, says Katie Dozier. Sharon Friday said, I feel like I'm a fairy floating in this poem. Yeah. PMB, I often write you when I mean me, which it is. So that's the thing. The you, we haven't maybe talked about this in a little while, but there's a thing with the you where it introduces ambiguity that other words don't. Because the you can mean three separate things. It can be like you all, it can be you, the reader, it can be me standing in for you, just talking to myself. And it's hard to know which one those is. And so it always throws you off a bit unless it's really clear. And it's sort of like a wasted, it's an ambiguity that's wasted because there's really no purpose that serves to be ambiguous about that. And so every time I see a you and I'm not clear which one it is at first, I always consider how could you change the poem to make it, would it be better if it was just me? Her flares, let's read it as me, and we'll see how it goes. And let's even, let's see. I try to use, can I do find and replace? I tried to use Google Docs just because it's a little easier. Where's find and replace on Google Docs? Edit? Replace? There it is. Just, oops. You, me. Replace all. Okay. Let's just read it like that and see how it feels. Spiral. She curves and flits fluently, a silver specter. She flickers, I've been here before. Her flares unbalance me, the static pricks me. Eyes parched, forget to blink. She does a lithe flyby, low and stealthy, trailing I guess the finder place doesn't always work. My sightline, a star shaped from dazzling ancient explosions. She hovers and pulses, light as sound as flavor on my tongue. Sorry, I guess that was on my tongue is hope that she will never disappear, which she does when she sees me see her. I don't know why I thought I could just find and replace that. That was silly. Well, I think I learned about this in school. I think I knew how geometry disperses her into light. I will never be able to see. I got to read this again. I'm sorry. I don't know why I thought that I could just find and replace that. I wasn't thinking. I was just trying to save time, and I cost time. Anyway, let's read it again with the eyes. Spiral. She curves and flits fluently, a silver specter. She flickers, I've been here before. Her flares unbalance me, the static pricks me. Eyes parched, forget to blink. She does a lithe flyby, low and stealthy, trailing my sightline, a star shaped from dazzling ancient explosions. She hovers and pulses, light as sound, as flavor on my tongue, is hope that she will never disappear. Which she does when she sees me see her. I think I learned about this in school. I think I know how geometry disperses her into light I will never be able to see. She's been here before. I think that means she'll come back. And so for this one, see, I always do that to see how it changes the poem and the feel of it. And I think it was better with the U, because one thing the U does that's a positive, in addition, it introduces that ambiguity, which is a little bit of a negative, but it also introduces through that ambiguity a bit of a sense of that ambiguity that more of a connection, I guess you could say, because I am you at the same time. And so in this one, because the poem is sort of amorphous and ephemeral to start with, I think it actually does work better. We'll just go back to the original version with the U's. Oops. Oh, I did the whole document. Sorry. We'll go back to the original with the U's. All right. And so I would actually keep it with that. It fits a little better. Oh, interesting. Someone's mentioning the Fibonacci sequence. Is it the Fibonacci? I missed that whole line. So Laura Turnbull's here and mentioned, and that's the form. Oh, that's really interesting. So yeah, so 3, 5, 7, 9, 13, is that the Fibonacci? But yeah, interesting. So it goes out like that, and that's how the line length. That's really cool. And the Fibonacci sequence, of course, is a spiral, and so it makes the same spiral. That's really neat. So yeah, I hadn't seen that comment, but yeah, I would go with that. And somebody was saying, yeah. So DeQuestheimer says the Fib Form Journal. That's interesting. So a whole journal of Fibonacci poems, says Katie Dozier. Wow. Syllables, said Laura Turnbull. So it's 1, 1, 2. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, there we go. That makes more sense. Yeah, so somebody was saying, someone had a title. Katie Dozier says, I would call it Fibonacci sequence. Yeah, or maybe Fibonacci spiral. Mark Goodness says a more informative title might help here. Watching the Milky Way. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, this is a neat form. I really like this poem. I like this form. And I think it works. Yeah, so how could I don't know, I think nobody noticed until Laura said what the form was doing. And I think it's too cool of a thing not to mention somehow. So you earlier somebody asked why I put a pantoum at the underneath the title of the last poem, and that was so people would know what it was if they didn't know. And I think even more stark, it's worth it doing here because it's a really cool aspect of it that we'd all just go right over our heads unless you think it's fun to have a poem that we don't realize what it is. I don't know how many people would get that just seeing it. And so we up our level of respect for a poem we already like by knowing it has, even if it's just a clue to that. And then you can sort of like, why would it be called Fibonacci spiral? And then you could be like, oh, the syllables are doing, oh, look at that. And then you have the whole thing going on. And then and that adds so much to the poem too, because the spiral, the Fibonacci sequence determines somehow the shape of spirals. And so, Yeah, and so I think it definitely put that in the title. It's a really cool poem, though. And then it's like a cut too from the topic, because that feeling, and she being back and who she is, and that specter of sort of a pattern, is sort of fleeting too. It's really interesting. I like that. There was one line. Let me where was it? There was one line that just felt off. I think it's my only like helpful suggestion, besides for like throwing us a bone with a Fibonacci sequence. Yeah, BMB says, or put it in the body of the poem, maybe. Yeah, that could be possible too. But there was one line. Let's see. She does a lift flyby, low and stealthy, trailing your sight line, a star shaped from dazzling ancient explosions. I think the dazzling ancient explosions is a little clunky and sort of one too many big words. Just for the sound of it, it felt a little off. And I would probably make that a little smoother. That was the one line. Although I guess we have to have number of syllables too, because we're counting syllables. It's a syllabic poem. But that was the one thing that felt a little clunky to read. Shaped from dazzling ancient explosions. Even if you broke it up, and if you just sort of moved, like that or something, it would read a little better. It just feels a little clunky. It's like that those syllables are sort of jammed in the way those words are. That makes it a little trippy. So maybe, I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but something a little feels a little, you could be smoothed out right there. But I like this. She hovers and pulses. Yeah. Light as sound is flavor in your tongue. This is my favorite part. I love the way that's jammed together as we start rushing through that spiral. Light as sound is flavor in your tongue is hope that she will never disappear, which she does when she sees you see her. You think you learn about this in school. You think you know how geometry disperses. See, the geometry is the only hint. Disperses into her light you will never be able to see. She's been here before. You think that means she'll come back. Yeah. Born of ancient explosions, says PMB. Yeah, so maybe yeah, or maybe I would just move the dazzling. Oop, like that. And I think that slows it down in the right spot so you don't trip over that. Oops, dazzling she hovers and pulses. And because you get that pause that lets you sort of catch your breath from all those syllables. There's something just off with the music there. Yeah, or formed by ancient explosions, or born of ancient explosions, dazzling she hovers. I think I would do that. That really is the problem. That is the dazzling ancient explosions. You're forced to. It's almost like you run out of breath, and so the the music is off a little bit there. But I think that was the only one, and it's a really musical poem otherwise. So one little edit. That's it, and then make it Fibonacci spiral, or subtitle it. I don't know. How do you spell Fibonacci? Whatever. I'm not going to pretend that I know how to spell it. A fib. And make it that like call the form something. Label your form. So then call it a Turnbull Fibonacci or something. I don't know. But you could label it something there as like a subtitle. And then Fibonacci. Fibonacci? Fibonacci? I don't know how to spell it. Fibonacci. I don't even remember what it is, to be honest. I mean, like what the actual sequence is. It's 1, 1. And what is it? Man, it's been so long since I did any math. Fibonacci. Okay, fine. I'm going to look it up. Fibonacci. Okay. It's spelled like it sounds. Okay, so that is it. And that is 0. Also, you have the 0 too. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. And why is it those numbers? Like I don't remember. Okay, so here it is. I'll just put this on the screen. I'm honestly embarrassed. I don't remember what this is anymore. The next number is from adding the two numbers before it. That's what it is. Okay. Gosh, it's been so long. So that so you add 0 and 1 to get 1. You add 1 and 2 to get 3. 3 and 5 get 8. That's what it is. Gosh. Okay. Well, anyway. That is the Fibonacci sequence. It's a very cool poem, Laura. Thanks for sharing that. It was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed and got something out of that. But either way, we had a lot of fun. Thanks for sharing those poems, and thanks to Cindy Guentherman, too, for sharing those. Okay, so that is the critique of the week for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. Let's see. So this week on the Rattlecast, we are going to have... Let's see. There we go. Ana Maria Caballero. Her new book, A Petit Mal, is a really interesting one. I mean, she is an NFT poet, but this is a traditional book, subtitled A Mother's Healing Song. And it's this really interesting hybrid prose poetry with a whole bunch of things mixed in kind of book. It's really, she, Anna is one of the founders of the Verse, along with Sasha Stiles, who was last week's guest. And so she's into this NFT community, and she's done, books as NFTs with Alexandria Labs and things like that. Has a whole bunch of NFT poems out, but she also has this book, which is very interesting, A Petit Mal, A Mother's Healing Love Story, which we'll be focusing on, or love song, I should say. But that is Radcast number 204. The prompt for this week, after Sasha Stiles' use of that alter ego, was to write a poem in dialogue with an alter ego. So do that however you'd like, however is interesting for you to play with that concept of some kind of dialogue with yourself, but not yourself in some way. Who knows what you're going to do, but that was the prompt, and then we'll talk to Ana Maria Caballero. Rattlecast 204, the regular time, July 31st, Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.